Hello and welcome to SSC 318, Substance Abuse and Criminality in Adolescence. It's a pleasure to welcome a speaker with us today who has come at some risk to himself to share his experience, strength, and hope in this whole business of substance abuse and criminality. We're very fortunate to have with us Russell Benning, whom I'm going to introduce. And Russ is here again to share his story. And the format for those of taking this ITV will be, first half will be lecture, second half will be questions and answers. Those taking this course in the streamed format spring semester will respond through your small group discussion and on the discussion board. So without further ado, it's a pleasure to welcome to our podium Russell Benning. Russ, thank you for coming.
Good morning. Thank you, Phil, for having me. I always get nervous when I stand up here and share this story because it's a personal story. It doesn't matter how many times I do it, my nerves still get racked. Now, this is a course on substance abuse and adolescence and criminality, and that's something I know a lot about from personal experience. But let me take you back first. Let me take you back to the beginnings and how my life unfolded, and I'll share my life with you because I think it'll give you some insights to how these things progress and what comes about from them. Let me say up front, too, that I don't make excuses for my past. I don't try to justify anything. I don't try to make it make sense because a lot of my life doesn't make sense. A lot of it is pretty senseless, actually. So let me be right up front about that first and foremost. My life is evolved the way it did, and things happen the way they did, but it's not to make excuses for it. It's a way of understanding it. When I was a little kid, when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, I can remember I lived in the town of Norway, which is in Oxford County here in Maine. I used to walk by the fire department all the time and see the big red fire trucks. And I can remember as a little kid dreaming of being one of those firemen. I wanted to get on that big red truck and go save people. I can remember going down to the store and cashing in cans and bottles and buying pockets full of candy. That's back when candy was still a penny a piece. I'd buy pockets full of this, and I'd go home and I'd give it to my mom, my dad, my brother, and my sister. I can remember dreaming of being a nurse, a veterinarian, a policeman, a fireman. I wanted to be all of these different things as a little kid that helped other people. I wanted to do all of these things that gave back to those around me. I was a giving child by nature. I was a giving kid by nature. Somewhere along the line, that changed for me. I grew up in an alcoholic family. My mother was a chronic alcoholic. The first memory I have of this being a problem, I was 5 years old. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I can remember my mother coming into mine and my brother's bedroom and having us go into hers. She sounded funny to me. I can vaguely remember that because her speech was slurred, and you know how people are when they're drunk. And she took us into her bedroom, and I can remember her having us sleep on the floor at the foot of her bed. And I can remember her and my father fighting, arguing while they were laying there in bed. And I can remember as a little kid laying there and being scared because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand what was happening, why Mom had pulled us in here and why the two of them were fighting. My parents divorced a couple of years later, back in 1977. I was 7 years old at the time. I didn't understand those things either. But what I do remember is that I went to live with my mother and I was with my father on the weekends. I can remember living with my mother and looking around the house, and the house was trashed. It was a mess. I can remember her having all kinds of different boyfriends. I can remember them staying up till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning drinking, the noise, the yelling, the fighting, the shouting. I remember one time when I was 8 years old, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up to listening to my mother and her boyfriend fighting. I could hear him slamming her off the walls in the kitchen, and I could hear her crying. I could hear him backhanding her across the head. So at 8 years old, I got up out of bed, I walked out into the kitchen, and I yelled at him to leave my mother alone. And when he didn't listen the first time, when he backhanded her and she hit the wall again, I yelled again, leave my mother alone. What I got for that was picked up and thrown across my bedroom. I hit the wall, I slumped to the floor like a sack of potatoes, and I curled into a ball and I fell asleep with my hands over my head. That's what I learned to do from that point forward, because I was defenseless to do anything. I learned to just put my hands over my head and crawl into a ball and pretend I didn't hear anything. But I did hear it. I heard it every single night. And I was scared to death as a little kid that one of those nights her boyfriend would go too far and I wouldn't have a mother again. That my mother would be gone, that he would kill her. I was petrified of that. I've watched her face get swollen up. I've seen black and blues all over her. I've seen her with broken bones. And I lived with that my whole life. At 16 years old, her and one of her boyfriends got into a fight. She locked herself in the bathroom. And the two of them were arguing back and forth, calling each other names. And I thought she was okay because she was locked away in the bathroom, but she wasn't. He went over to the bathroom, kicked the door open, slammed the door into her between her and the wall. And then she started crying and yelling at him. And when he went to step back towards her, I stepped in front of him. And at 16 years old, I'm in a full-fledged fist fight with a guy at least twice my age. I lost, but I took the beating instead of my mother taking it. That was the only way I could defend my mother. As I was going through this in my life, I never understood that my mother had a drinking problem. I knew she liked to go out and drink. I knew she liked to spend time with her friends. But I didn't understand what the issues behind alcohol and drugs were. Didn't know. All I knew is that in my family, it was stressed that you don't talk about these things outside of the home. You deal with your family issues inside the family. I learned that very early, and it was a very powerful lesson. I also learned a lot of other things as I was going through that process. I learned from my mother that I was the reason that she was drinking. Because with kids like us, it was enough to drive her to drink. We were always in her hair. Go watch TV, get out of my hair. I don't want to deal with you right now. I came across all kinds of situations like that. I can remember 18 years old, 18 years into my life. By this point, I had my own drug issues. I had just gone through drug rehab, was trying to stay clean, and this girl had come up to me asking me questions on where she could get drugs. My mother came out of a bar drunk, walked up to us, knew who the girl was, knew that I used to do drugs with her, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing, just talking to Tess." And she says, "You're back doing drugs again, aren't you?" And I'm like, "No, Mom, I'm not." Yeah, you are. You're nothing but a crack baby, just a crack baby. You're nothing but an AIDS baby, a friggin' AIDS baby. And at that point, it's like, you know what? Whatever. Come on, Tess, let's go get high. Because I'd learned those things over and over again. I learned to isolate myself. All through my life as a little kid, the only way I could get away from the traumas that I was experiencing in my life, the pains that I was feeling, the confusion, the fear, was to withdraw to my room. I would withdraw to my room and I would isolate myself there. And I'd make up my own little fantasy worlds. I'd make up my own little fantasy places where I could express what I was feeling because there was no other place to express them. Because if any other emotion was expressed in my home, the result from that was other people expressing their anger from it. So anger is the only thing I ever really saw. I saw it when my mother was getting her butt beat by her boyfriends. I saw it when I tried to express any emotion outside of that. I saw it at school because I was so isolated and so withdrawn that other kids were picking on me and teasing me throughout school. So I got abused a lot in school as well, which only helped to reinforce all the things I was learning all along, that I was the reason my mother was drinking, that I wasn't good enough. My brother was the oldest of us siblings. There was me, my brother, and my two sisters. He was the one that my mother looked up to. He was the one that got all the good grades, that went off to join the military. You know, he was the high achiever. As substance abuse classes will call it, he was the hero in my family. And my mother always put him up on this pinnacle. Why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you act like him? Why can't you be as responsible as him? And no matter how hard I tried to meet that goal, no matter how hard I tried to do in school, no matter how hard I tried to make the friends that he had all kinds of, I could never reach that point. The first time I picked up drugs, I was 7 years old. By this point, I was trying to stay away from home because it was too painful. There was too much to deal with there. So I'd take my time walking home from school, and I ran into a kid. It's the only kid that chose to take me in as a friend. So I started walking around and hanging out with him. And one day he comes to me and he says, "Hey, you want to smoke a joint with me?" And I'd been raised around this my whole life. I'd seen my mother's boyfriends. I'd even seen her smoke pot all the time. So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? It can't be that big a deal. Everybody else is doing it, right? So I smoked that joint with him. And you know what? It was great. It was awesome. All of the pains, all of the stresses, all the traumas of my life were suddenly gone. I felt great. Life was grand. Life was funny for a change. And so I continued to hang out with this kid. And I continued to smoke pot with him. And as time went on, I learned that at 7, 8, 9 years old, you can't afford to buy this stuff. You just can't afford to do that. So you have to come up with new ways to get this. And this same kid taught me how to steal, taught me how to shoplift. A couple shoplifting, a couple little pieces of jewelry here and there, that doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you're trying to support marijuana or any other drug, it becomes an issue. Because a pair of earrings isn't going to buy you a joint. You need more than that. And so I learned very quickly how to steal bigger things. I learned very quickly how to break into people's homes. Because I was a kid by myself with no supervision, withdrawn from most people, and running the streets. So that's what I did. I started robbing people, I started stealing, all to support a habit to keep away the pains and the traumas that I was feeling at home. That's what I did. And I did that for a number of years. As I continued on in that process, it was only a matter of time. I mean, you commit crimes, you get caught. It's only a matter of time before those things come down. The first time I got arrested for shoplifting, I was taken down to the police station and my parents were called. My mother and her boyfriend came down, and while they were in the police station, they're like, "You wait till you get home, you're grounded for life," and all of these different things. But as soon as I got home, they forgot all about it. But I did learn something from this. I did learn that my mother had to pay attention to me if I got into trouble. Negative attention is better than no attention at all. So I started on that process. Hanging out with this one kid on the streets, picking up the mentalities and the ideals and the mindsets of the streets of live free and die hard. To hell with everyone else, I'll do what I want. You know, this is my life, you can't tell me how to live it. I started all of those mindsets when I was 9 years old. I don't know what you folks know about substance abuse, but I'm sure you know a little bit being in this class. But once you start using drugs, you stop growing, you stop maturing. Drugs and alcohol interfere with your ability to mature. My maturity stopped at 9 years old. And I stopped growing mentally and emotionally at that point. So I continued on that course, doing this, doing that, getting into as much trouble as I could, skipping school, not going to classes, because that was another whole issue that I could avoid now, just by not going. Doing everything that was put in front of me. I started doing other drugs as well. It started off because my brother was huffing at the time, old paint thinner. Old bottles of paint thinner. You used to buy them in the novelty stores for your models, for putting your models together. And it's only a 2-minute high, but it was better than no high at all. And it was part of the culture of hanging out on the streets. Do everything and anything. Get high however you can, you know. That rebel without a clue thing. That's really what it was. So I jumped on board with him, and I was huffing this stuff. That moved to doing speed, doing different pills, doing any pill put in front of me. That moved into alcohol. I started drinking regularly on the weekends. That eventually led to drinking all of the time. My progression started with a joint, but it moved very quickly into other things. Because drugs were the only way to avoid all of the stresses and pains that I was feeling. Drugs were the only way for me to escape. Drugs were the way for me to medicate my life, because I had no other way of coping with these things. Nobody had ever taught me how to cope with these things. At 9 years old, how do you know how to deal with those kind of stressors? You don't. You don't. And so I continued down that line. And anything and everything that was put in front of me, I did. Started off with pot, it went to rush, it went to speed, it went to LSD. It went through all of these different things. And I didn't care what it was. I didn't care. Just give it to me so I can do away with all of this stuff that I don't want to think about. The funny thing is that every time I came down from the high, those things were still there. And each time I came down, they were worse. Why were they worse? Because I never learned the skills to cope with those things. I never coped with them. The drugs just suppressed that stuff. They never dealt with those things. It just suppressed them. And with each drug, each high I did, the fewer inhibitions I had on whatever else I did. So I was breaking into companies, I was breaking into people's cars, I was stealing whatever and wherever I wanted. I was going to gay bars and beating up homosexual men to steal their money, to take their wallets. And I thought it was funny. I thought that was the cool thing to do. I can remember one time, I was probably 14 years old. I broke into this one apartment, and I'm sitting there and I'm going through the apartment. I got really cocky as a kid. I went into the living room, and I'm unhooking his TV and his stereo system and all of his electronics, and I'm bundling it all up, and he only lives a block away from where I live. And I'm just going to carry all of this stuff home, you know, thinking I'm really cool and macho. And I was so cocky and arrogant that I went over to the refrigerator, because it was lunchtime, opened up the refrigerator, took out some sandwiches and some sandwich meat, sat down at his kitchen table, had a sandwich, and I made myself lunch. And then I put his dishes into the sink, and I left a little note saying, "Thanks for lunch." Because I thought I was funny. I thought I was cool. And then I tiptoed over to his bedroom, and I opened the bedroom door, and lo and behold, somebody was laying in bed. Talk about your heart stopping. But it didn't stop me. I peered into his bedroom, and I saw some money up on his dresser. So I tiptoed into his bedroom, took the money off the dresser, put it in my pocket, walked out, grabbed the electronics, and went home. And I thought I was all great and macho and awesome because I had just gotten away with all of this stuff. Part of the mindset that I had developed over time. Because negative attention is better than no attention at all. My life continued to progress that way. And at 15 years old, I ended up in the Maine Youth Center down in South Portland. And I can remember going into the Maine Youth Center and thinking, oh, great, what now? And all of these people were like these authoritarians telling us what we had to do, when we had to do it, and at what time we had to do it, and how much time we had to get this done, and all of these different things. And I'm looking at this saying, screw you. I'll do what I want. You can't tell me what to do. You know, because I'd built that up in myself over time. I had built that up, and I'd come to the point where nobody was going to tell me anything. It was my life, and nobody was going to tell me how to live it. I had lived my life pretty much for most of my life up to that point anyways, because I didn't have any parental supervision. My mother was drinking and out in the bars all the time. It was up to me to take care of myself. So these people weren't going to take care of me. And what I learned instead in there is listening to the war stories of other kids that were in there and all of the things they had done, all of the crimes they had committed. And I was like, hey, that's a good idea. That's a quick way to make a buck. That's a quick way to get more money to do more drugs. So I became more of a criminal. And what happened also in that environment is I had these people telling me that I was a criminal. Now, I have my own personal biases against that. You're a child going into a correctional system. You're not a criminal going into a correctional system. You're a child that committed a crime. When you lose the child, you create more of a criminal. If you forget to treat the child, you create more of a criminal, because that's all you're surrounded by. What I was getting there was the same negative reinforcement I had gotten all of my life at home. I'm a criminal. I'm no good. I'm enough to drive her to drink. So it was just one more thing, and I was like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I already know that. What's new? I can remember staff members there trying to intimidate me, saying, you're going to end up no good. You're going to end up in prison. I know, I've seen people just like you. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard this my whole life. And, you know, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be the bad seed. I learned to be the bad seed because that's the only thing that gave me attention. That's the only thing that made my mother pay attention to me. So that's what I learned to do. And I learned more of it by being there and because of the way in which they approached me. I felt very isolated. I felt very removed. I can remember while I was there, the unit director of the unit I was in called me up to her office. And she said, Russell, we're going to put you in state custody. And I'm like, why is that? And she's like, well, neither one of your parents want you back. My mother, I understood because she was an alcoholic. And I had some sense of that, though I wasn't really fully understanding of it. But my father, I was like, well, no, my dad will take me back. And she called him right there on the phone. And she said, "Hi, David, do you want to take your son Russell back?" "No? Okay, goodbye." As cold and callous as that. Another negative reinforcement over everything else. I didn't have a family. As a little kid, I was this given child. As a little kid, I wanted to be all of these different things. Years and years and years of negative reinforcements of substance abuse and the inability to grow, the inability to mature without any coping skills or lessons to help guide me along the way. No adults in my life to give me those things. I pretty much gave up at that point. And it's like, this is who I am. This is who I am. Didn't want to be that. Some little part of me deep down inside still had the dreams of that little kid. But I was throwing my hands up in the air. And so I became the worst kid that youth center has ever seen. And I still get those comments from staff members there today. You were one of the worst that we've ever had to deal with. While I was there, I was put in segregation. While I was in segregation, all of these emotions that were building up inside me kind of blew up. I locked 4 staff members in a cell in segregation because they left my cell door open while they were trying to restrain another kid from hurting himself. Locked all 4 of them into that cell. Took over the security unit. Trashed the unit. Back then, the personal alarm systems that most correctional officers carry around on them today, those things went for about $3,500 a piece back then because they were brand new. I took 3 of them and I smashed them off the walls, thinking it was great, thinking it was fun. Completely trashed the entire segregation unit. They had files upon files of records on all of the kids that were in there. I shredded all of them because I thought it was funny. I thought, yeah, I'll show you. You want to keep records on us and treat us like another stick? Here you go. You know, confetti now. They called in the South Portland Police, Tactical Police Unit, and they had attack dogs and everything else. 5 staff members came crashing through the door, and the first one that came through the door I hit with one of those metal YMCA chairs. I dropped him, the other 4 tackled me. And they started hitting me, started swinging. You might say that's wrong, and I would agree with you. But I can also understand the stress and the frustration of having to deal with that when you've seen one of your coworkers go down by being hit by a chair because some kid wants to go off. They threw me in my cell and they were swinging at me, and this big guy, you know, he was probably 28, 30, and I was laughing at him. I'd been beaten enough in my life where this didn't faze me in the least. I was laughing at him. I said, is that as hard as you can hit? You hit like a girl. Come on, hit. You can hit harder than that. And they had what they called hog tying back then. It's plastic zip tie restraints. They put my hands behind my back, they zip tied my ankles together, they zip tied my hands, and then they put the 2 together behind my back. That's what they call hog tying. It's to restrain you so you don't hurt yourself or anyone else. But if you know those things, you know how to break them too. So I broke them, and I started creating more havoc, banging on my door so nobody could sleep, yelling, screaming, tearing up my mattress, all kinds of different things. Where was this rage coming from? All those pent-up emotions over all of those years of feeling neglected, outside of a family, not feeling a part of a home, feeling unloved, not being able to express the fears and the pains that I felt inside. That's where those things were coming from. I remember another time, because if you look at my wrist, you can see that it's cut up pretty bad. They had these little square floor tiles in the segregation unit, and you could chip them up and smash them off the floor, and they'd get razor sharp. and I'd sit there and I'd cut my arm. I'd fill these little pints, milk pints, and I'd pour it down over myself, and then I'd stand in the door and say, "Come and get me," you know. It was a game. It was a joke. I tried hanging myself a couple of different times while I was in segregation there. I'd wait for the guard to come around. All it was a cry for help. I'd wait for the guard to be doing his round and doing his checks, and I'd hang myself and hope he got there in time to open the door and cut me down. But the thing with segregation is a lot of times, kids will stop guards and get into a conversation with them because they don't have anything else to do in segregation. I was playing a very dangerous game. One part of me just wanted help. The other part of me was crying out, looking for help, looking for somebody to listen and to understand. They sent me, after a couple of attempts at this, to see the psychologist there. I'll just call him Dr. S. Dr. S sat me down in his office and he said, "So I understand you've been trying to kill yourself." I said, "If that's what they say," because I was still being standoffish, I was still being the rebel, I was still being all of these different things. And he said, "Well," he says, "hang is probably the worst way you can do that. You hang yourself and then you asphyxiate. You sit there and your body goes into these nervous convulsions, and at that point you can't get out of it because you don't have the strength to pull yourself back up. And then you piss and you shit in your pants when you die. So what do you think of that?" And I knew this game. I've been playing games my whole life. I knew this game. He was trying to throw another scare tactic at me. He was just trying to throw fear into me. But for me as a kid, back in the back of my mind, it was just another one of those things. You'll always be a criminal. You'll never be good. You're enough to drive me to drink. It was another negative reinforcement. And he said, he went on from there. He said, "You know, the best way to kill yourself," he says, "is to put a gun in your mouth." He says, "because it blows your brains all over the wall and you don't have to worry about anything. Or better yet, just under the chin." He says, "That way there's no doubt. You know you're gonna do it." And he sat there and he was smiling. I can remember the smile. It was like one of those little shock smiles that all these weird psychologists have. And I looked at him and I said, "You got a gun?" That took the smile off his face anyways. I was happy about that. I was very defiant. In hindsight, when I look back, that defiance was probably a good thing. It's unfortunate that it was focused in the wrong directions, because that defiance is what kept me alive through all of this. That defiance is what kept me going. Because I wasn't at home anymore. I was running the streets. I was living on the streets. I was going to the soup kitchens and I was eating at the soup kitchens. I was going to the food banks and getting food there. I did not want to live at home because there was too many stresses, too many traumas at home. I can remember sleeping under a train trestle. Now, underneath this little train trestle, there was a little gap between two beams, and I can remember putting cardboard on those beams so that I wouldn't roll over in the middle of the night and fall into the river. And it was late fall when I was sleeping there, cuddled up in a ratty old winter jacket. And that's how my life progressed for a long period of time. I actually got into prostitution to support my drug habit. A very embarrassing thing to admit. I had been molested a number of times because I was a kid running the streets. I was a kid running the streets. My hygiene was poor because I didn't feel good about myself. My esteem was very low. And I got into prostitution because I thought nobody else cared about me, that I was never going to find anybody who loved me. And you know what, to hell with it. I've already been exposed to this. I'm going to get into prostitution. It's quick money. And every time I did that, the more degrading, ugly, filthy I felt. But I'd get that $20 or $30. I'd go get high and I'd forget about it and do it again. Do you see the pattern here? Do you see how this became worse and worse and worse as time went on? All because of one joint? That continued for a couple of years. I'm a diabetic as well. I have to take insulin shots. I was on Medicaid at the time. This was back in 1988. I used to go and get prescriptions from 3 or 4 different doctors because I'd end up in the ICU ward. And then I'd go to 3 or 4 different pharmacies, and Medicaid was paying for it all. So I'd get 400 or 500 needles at a time. Back then, you couldn't get needles over the counter. Needles went for $5 a piece on the streets. So what I was doing is I'd get 400 needles, I'd sell 380 of them. And the 20 that I needed for my own medications, I'd use over and over and over again. I got a leg infection. I got a big dent in my leg from a leg infection because of this. At 18 years old, I can remember waking up. I'd been drinking with a friend. I'd been doing coke. I'd been doing all of these different things, partying for a week heavy. And I woke up one morning and I started throwing up. This stuff that I was throwing up was a darker green than green olives. It was really nasty. And buckets full of this stuff was coming out of me. Literally buckets full. 5-gallon buckets filling and dumping and filling again. So I had my friend call an ambulance. They took me to the hospital. And I ended up in the ICU ward of the hospital because my liver was 6.5 inches larger than normal and I had 2 holes in it. 18 years old, 2 holes in my liver in an ICU ward of the hospital. They put the IVs in me, they put the insulin drips and all of that because my blood sugar was like 800. 3 days there, and a nurse came in and I looked at her and I said, "Take these IVs out of my arms." And she said, "I can't do that without a doctor's order." And I looked at her and said, "Well, either you do it or I'm going to." And she put some gauze on the table and she says, "I can't and I'm not going to." So she left and I took them out. I took them out, I got my clothes on and I walked out of the hospital. Went straight to my dealer's house. I can remember while I was living on the streets, also when I was 18, and being so hard up. I don't know what folks know about cocaine use, but when you use cocaine, you carry a spoon around with you because cocaine residue builds up on the spoon over time. And then you can take a piece of cotton, wash it around, and get more off from it. And that's what I was doing too. I was carrying a spoon around with me. But it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. Nobody was answering their doors. Nobody would let me in because they were all tired of my crap. So what I did is I took my spoon, drew some water out of a mud puddle, and used that to get high. Because that was more important than anything else at that time. When I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, I used to take care of my 2 younger sisters. I was raising them. I was the one making their meals, going and finding the food for them, taking them down to the soup kitchen because my mother was using all her money in the bars. But at 18 years old, I forgot completely about them. My sisters were a faded memory to me. All I was a kid that was stuck in a mode. I was stuck in this mode of, I'm supposed to be the bad guy. I'm going to be the best bad guy I can be. To hell with everything. I tried committing suicide a half a dozen times. As I said, I'm a diabetic. 2 or 3 extra units of insulin will make my blood sugar bottom. Dangerous for me. I laid down one night, I took 350 extra units of insulin. 3 hours later, I woke up, was pissed that I wasn't dead, took another 150 units, and still woke up. I was angry. I was angry at God for not letting me die. I was angry at life for not cutting me a break. I was angry for the crapped out hand I had been dealt and just didn't care. I gave up at that point. I stopped caring about everything. And all I did from that point forward was walk from one high to the next, a zombie in this state of numbness to the world. Didn't care about anybody, didn't care about myself. And that's how my life progressed. I continued down that road for another year and a half, breaking into homes, breaking into apartments, breaking into stores, prostituting, doing all of these different things. And at 19 years old, I ran into another friend. I started partying with him, doing cocaine. Because at that point, cocaine was my drug of choice. And we partied hard and we partied long. 5 days straight on coke. 5 days straight of being high. No sleep. Just in a daze, in a fog. At the end of that 5 days, we started to come down. And I was getting angry. I was angry with life. I was angry with my family. I was angry with the world. And all that anger really was a great deal of deep-seated pain. I looked at my friend who had a knife on him, and I asked him for the knife because I was going to break into the apartment downstairs. So I did. Went into this apartment, stole a bunch of stuff, walked out. But at 1 o'clock in the morning, there's no place to sell this stuff unless you can trade it to a dealer for drugs. And what I was looking at was nothing any dealer was going to want. And so I looked at my friend and I said, because I was so angry with the world, and there was another apartment downstairs, I said, I'm going to kill the guy downstairs. He says, no, you're not. You're out of your mind. I said, watch me, because I wanted to be as bad as they could be, because negative attention was better than no attention at all. And I went downstairs, and I killed that man. And for the next week, I did everything and anything to get more drugs because I didn't want to think about it. That little seed inside me, that little kid that wanted to give, was dead. I had killed him in that moment. And I had killed this man. And for a week, I tried to stay away from it. The police were questioning me because I lived upstairs from this person. They questioned me 4 or 5 times. So it was constantly in my face. I couldn't get away from it. As much as I tried to bury it, I couldn't. And it came down to a simple choice for me at that time. This happened in the Lewiston area, and I sat on the bridge between Lewiston and Auburn. And it came down to a simple choice. Either dump myself in that river or turn myself in. It was January. That water looked awfully cold. And the idea of drowning scared the crap out of me. It sounded way too painful to do. And I felt like a coward for not doing it. And so I turned myself in, expecting to spend the rest of my life in prison. I can remember when I went to court to be sentenced. My mother, my father, one of my aunts, my sister Holly, which is the oldest of my 2 sisters, and a friend of the family were all there. My mother was bawling her eyes out. the friend of the family stood up to speak on my behalf, and I was just sitting there with my head hung down. And when everybody got up to leave after they had read my sentence and everybody got up to leave, I stood up and gave everyone a hug. My sister, who was 16 at the time, was the last one to leave. And I stepped to give her a hug, and she just looked at the floor and walked past me. She couldn't even look at me. I have no idea what I did to that girl. I have no idea what I did to her in her mind or in her heart. But I do know she couldn't look at me. And she just walked by. My other sister, I had seen her a few weeks before. She was 7 years old at the time. And the last time I saw her, her face was covered in tears because Bambi's mother had died. I can remember giving her a hug and feeling sorry for her. I haven't seen her since. She's in her mid-30s now. I have another sister that's in her late 20s that I've never met, never even knew she was born until much later. Just recently started phone conversations with her. A whole lifetime passed me by. I went into prison, had no idea what to expect, but because I'd run the streets for so long, I knew some people in there. My first year in, I was raped by a man much bigger than me. And I was fortunate that I did know people, because those people came to my aid and told this person to leave me alone. That doesn't normally happen. Normally, if that happens, you become that individual's kid, and it continues to happen to you over and over and over again, because I've seen it happen to a lot of kids. I'm lucky that those people came to my aid, because it would have happened to me too. I've seen people stabbed. My good friend Dennis had a knife that long and that wide shoved through him. He flatlined 4 times on the way to the hospital as they fought to keep him alive. All over a $20 gambling debt. I've got images burned into my brain that I wish weren't there. I went to ask a friend for a cigarette, turned the corner to go into his cell. He was rolling cigarettes. Another guy was buckling his pants, and another guy had another guy in the corner having sex with him. It's not an image I want in my head, but it's there. It's there because of my drug use. It's there because I grew up in a drug and alcohol environment. I've gotten into discussions. I share my story a lot online as well as in public forums like this. And I got into an argument with a guy over the use of marijuana. He's one of these people that thinks marijuana is harmless. He's one of these people that thinks that marijuana should be legalized. I'm dead set against it. Straight up, honest. Dead set against it. Most people that try marijuana try something else, because if marijuana is harmless, then the rest of it's harmless too. Everyone that I know that's ever smoked marijuana has tried something else. I know people today that are completely loopy in the head. They come across as mentally retarded because they've smoked so much pot that their brains are just burnt out. They can't function right. All of these things lead from one to the next. And with each one, a new risk is being developed. A new risk is taking place. A friend of mine knows 2 kids. He used to sell marijuana. A friend of mine knows 2 kids. They were 12 and 14 years old. They bought their joints off from a guy that he worked with selling pot. The 12 and the 14-year-old were walking across the catwalk of this trestle forgot that that the catwalk didn't go all the way across the trestle. The 12-year-old walked off the end, fell on the rocks, and died. A good friend of mine named Jessica was into prostitution as well. She was 18 years old. They found her body in Bath in a sleeping bag with her throat cut from ear to ear. I've had friends of mine overdose in prison. There's more drugs in prison than there are on the streets. People put it in, what they do is they take these rubber gloves, they pack the finger of the glove in 3 or 4 layers of gloves, and then they put it in their anus. Or they have a guard smuggle it in, or they put it in balloons and swallow it when they get in a kiss during a visit. A $20 amount of cocaine on the streets goes for $100 inside a prison. So it's not like it's not there and that the incentive's not there, because it is. There's more of it. So it's all around, it's all available. People make homebrew. They take a bunch of fruit, they throw it in a bag, and they let it stew until it turns into alcohol. Because it's a quick, easy way to get high. And for the first couple of years that I was in, I was still getting high because I didn't know how to deal with things. I still didn't know how to cope. I didn't have the tools to do that. But it came to a point, a couple years in, I was laying in my cell. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and the realization of everything just kind of folded in on me. I had no family. I had no life. I was looked at as a monster. I was a murderer. I had taken somebody's life. And all of that stuff was weighing on me. And I started to cry. And I cried for a good 4 hours. And I was like, I don't know what to do. What do I do? And at the end of that 4 hours, it became really simple and clear to me. You can either sink into the shadows of this place and become the monster everybody thinks you are, or you can try to change this and do something about it. And I didn't want to be that monster. Some little seed of that kid who wanted to give, some little seed of that kid that hoped, didn't want to be that monster. And so I started a very, very long process of building my life back up, of rediscovering who I am. And it wasn't an easy task. It took a lot of years. I knew at that point that I needed to be a responsible individual. I'd gone through 13 jobs in 1 year. Just enough time to get a few bucks together to go get high when I was on the streets. So I decided in myself, my own idea of what responsibility was, is that I needed to hold a job for at least a year. It set a goal for me. And I achieved that. I was the librarian in the prison system for a year until I moved on to something else. But it proved to me that I could do it, that I could achieve that. It made me a more responsible person. I became involved in nonprofit groups that exist within the prison system. The JCs, the National Junior Chamber of Commerce. There are other ones as well. In that capacity, I sat as a secretary for 8 years, and we raised a lot of different money for various charities. I'd say at least $250,000 in 8 years for different charities. It made me a responsible person. I also know, in my own sense of things on what it means to be a good person and doing the right things, that I needed an education. So I got involved in the education department as well, doing different classes as well as college classes. I also knew that in my own mind, the idea of being a good and decent person meant finding a spiritual foundation. So I got involved in spiritual groups as well, and that really became the foundation upon which everything else got built. From that, I learned how to be self-responsible. From that, I learned how to take personal accountability. From that, I also learned that what I put out in the world is what comes back to me. And when I looked at that and I looked back on my life, my whole life had been about negative reinforcements, negative attentions. Everybody had told me that I was no good and that I'd never be anything. And I bought into that. I bought into that idea and I ran with it. And my life became what it did because of it. I didn't want that anymore. So I started setting my goals on new directions. I wanted to get involved in volunteer groups. I wanted to get involved in volunteer organizations. I sat for 2 years as a literacy volunteer within the prison system. I became part of a program called College Guild run by a friend of mine out of Brunswick, Maine. And all they do is send educational packets to inmates all over the country. I became involved in that. I became involved in all of these different things. I went to high schools while I was incarcerated and talked to kids like I'm talking here today, encouraging them to make the right choices. I got involved in things, and the more I got involved, the better I felt about myself. It's kind of odd for me because there are some things that I just can't change. I cannot take back what I've done. There's no way to undo that. There's no way I'll ever be able to undo that. Life is the most sacred thing there is, and I took that. I stole that. There's no way to undo that. I'm fortunate today to have wonderful people in my life. I'm fortunate today. My family was not able to give me the love and compassion and role models that I needed in order to mature. I was lucky enough to find that in friends that I have today. Friends who are well established in their communities, who are wonderful people that are involved in a lot of things themselves, and they encourage me, and they're my support today. They're my family. I have a wonderful wife today and a wonderful family that backs me as I make my way along. But it's not always easy for me. It's not always easy to hold that guilt, to hold that memory, and to carry it along. Because I have to not only live for myself and my family, but there's a person that's no longer here because of me. His legacy is attached to mine, however that might unfold. It's tragic that this man lost his life. It's tragic that he's no longer here. I do not want it to be even more tragic by doing nothing with it. If I did nothing with it at all, it would be a complete tragedy, and I can't live with that. I can't live with it. So I do things like this. I share my story hoping it'll give insights. I share my story hoping it'll encourage one adolescent to move in a new direction. I share my story so that it might give insights on how to deal with people and to give some insights to people who are going through similar circumstances. It's not always an easy thing. It's not always easy to see what the problem is. There are a lot of people in my life that reached out to me. There are a lot of people that reached out and tried to help, but they didn't take the time to understand the full scope of what was going on. They got an understanding of pieces of it. They got understandings of pieces of my life, but they never put the pieces together. So they were never able to really intervene. I went through drug rehab twice, and they never caught on. I went through a halfway house for 3.5 months, and they didn't catch on. You need to be able to take in the full scope of the individual you're dealing with, because there are usually a lot of deeper-seated issues that the client themselves, I know I wasn't aware of, the client themselves aren't aware of. I wasn't aware of the fact that I didn't have coping skills that I needed. I wasn't aware of the fact that I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. I wasn't aware of those things until somebody made me aware of them. I went through a lot of different counseling programs, and I had the support of a lot of wonderful people that helped me get my life back on track. I think the most important thing is that I wanted to get my life back on track. Without that, it's very difficult. But I will say this as well. My time going through the youth center, as bad of an experience as that was, and the negative reinforcements I received from that, there are also a lot of good things that came out of that. The Maine Youth Center and the programs it forced me to take planted seeds that later on took root. The seeds that they shared with me on drug addiction and substance abuse and all of those different things, the insights those gave me on the hero and the scapegoat and all of these different things, without those seeds, I wouldn't have had the idea to reach out. Without those seeds, I wouldn't have had the idea of hoping that I could change my life. So for those people that say that forced treatment doesn't work, I disagree. I absolutely disagree. Because if the person's unwilling to reach out themselves, you have to try. You have to at least try. If it fails after that, then you've at least made an effort towards it. And who knows what seed might take root if you do. It might be just the one that saves that person's life. There's no easy way to share this. There's no easy way to tell this story. There's no easy way to cope with it. But I do. I do the best that I can. I'm working today. I'm out in the community today. I've been a free man for 9 months. I've been substance free for 18 years. And I'm dead set against them under any circumstance. My thought is this, and get into that argument with the person that was for marijuana. Why? Why would you try something like that? We know that marijuana is addictive. We know that it's a gateway drug. There's no dispute in these two facts. These are clear and obvious things. Why? Why would you risk your life like that? Why would you risk the chance of becoming addicted to those things? Why? There has to be a reason. There has to be a reason behind it. If it's to rebel, if it's to be defiant, okay, well, there's a lot of good positive ways to be rebellious and defiant. There's a lot of organizations out there where you can get a good dose of that. Why marijuana? Why? Why risk your life with something like that? If it's to get away from pains, if it's to cope with life that you don't know how to cope with, there are counselors and there are organizations to help with that sort of thing too. Why? Why risk your life with those things? That's my biggest question to all of those people, and that was my question to this individual too. They stopped arguing with me after that. It's a real simple question. It's a question that digs deeper into the truth of what's really going on. That really gets down to the root of why. Now it's been an hour already, so I'm going to give it a break here. I think you've pretty much got a good sense of my story, and I'll be happy to try to answer questions after the break, I guess.